Okay, so in today's session, we are going to see how to uh, call a REST web service which is developed in the source in the Salesforce using the Apex class. Okay, so we have a I mean there will be situations where we want to call a web service which is deployed or hosted on the Salesforce, right? And we can develop those web services, REST web services, using the Apex class, right? So what we are going to understand is something like this, right? So we have a web service inside the, this is my Salesforce, right? So we have a web service hosted on the Salesforce, and I want to use my Mulesoft API to call this REST web service, right? So we will see what all steps we need to take here in the Mule, right? As well as on the what how to develop or how to host a REST web service in the Salesforce. Okay, so let's start. So first, let's understand how to develop a REST web service inside the Salesforce, and then we'll call the same web service from the Mulesoft API. Okay. So to create the web service, we have to go to setup and click on the developer console. Okay, so file, new, right? So we are going to create a Apex class, and that Apex class will work as a RESTful web service, right? So, or in other way, I mean, if you want to create a REST web service in the Salesforce, you have to create an Apex class, right? So let's create an Apex class. So suppose name of that class is get employees. Okay, so this is my class, and this is how we create the Apex class in um, in the Salesforce if you are using developer console, right? So the first thing is we have to modify the access modifier of the Apex class for the RESTful web service, right? Because this Apex class will be called or used by some other code or some other API which is outside of your application, right? So in the Salesforce, like, we have four access modifiers: private, protected, public, and global, right? So private, protected, and public is like somewhat what we have in Java, but the global is something new which is not in Java, or not in Java. I'm not sure about other programming languages, right? So global means this Apex class can be called from anywhere, right? As long as the system or the code which is calling it has access to this class. Okay, so it can be it is available, or it can be visualized from anywhere, right? So let's make it global. Okay, next thing, right? To make a REST class as a RESTful web service, we have to annotate that class with a annotation called the REST resource. Let's see. Resource, and inside this we have to use a parameter, and the name of the parameter is URL mapping equal to this, and that this is your URL for this um, resource, okay, or for this class, right? So let's say find employees, right? So the point what I'm trying to make here is, I mean, that this URL can be anything. It does not have to the same what is your class name, right? So that is the reason I did not use this word here in the URL, right? So it can be anything, whatever you want, right? And after that we need to create a method inside this class, right? And again, that method also need to be global. So global static void, because I do not want to return anything for now, and then global static void, and then you can name the method the way you want. So it can be any name, right? So for me, let's say suppose get employees. Okay, and again, this class name and method name don't need to match. It can be anything, right? Again, this method need to be annotate with another annotation called the http post, right? So that will indicate that this method can be accessed only through the post request, not from the get request or any other REST method or http method. So this method can be called using this URL only with the post request. So that is what this annotation indicates. Next, so in Apex class, right, we have a static what do we call the static class, right, which can be used to access the request and response objects. Okay, so it's like if you're familiar with Java, right? So we have a factory class, so factory method that can be used to get the request and response object, and the name of that class is REST context, right? We use this class to get the request and response object. So this is my request object. I will store it in the request, and then REST response equals to REST context dot response, right? So I hope you understand, right? So what we are doing here is, when your API or anyone or client when sends a request, right, to your what happened, right, when client sends a request to the Salesforce, right, that request will go to your Apex class, right, and then inside the Apex class, that particular method which is annotated with the http post will be called. Inside that method, I'm using one of the factory class to get the request and response object. So I will get a request and response object, right? So all the information related to this request that just now arrived will be stored in this request object, right? And whatever I want to send back to the client, I can send it using my response object. Okay, so this is how it will work, right? So that is why I created request and response objects. And remember that for every request, right, system will create separate request and response object. Okay, let's get back here again. Okay, now in the next we are going to request dot get request dot no, this is response. I want request dot request body, right? And I'm converting it into a string object. So here it is, body equal to this. Then I also want to, so in my request I will send a body, right? And I will send one parameter, right? Which is the name, employee name, right? And I can also pass some body in the request. So I will demonstrate that I'm using this statement, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm getting request body, right, from the request, and converting it into a string, and store it in the body so that I print it in the logs, right? Similarly, I will also get string name equal to request dot, there will be params dot, and then get name, right? So this is how we get the query parameters from the request object, right? And if you want, you can create as many objects. I mean, you can send as many parameters as you want, and you can access or retrieve those request parameters or query parameters like this. Okay, so for now what I'm going to do is system dot, I'm just writing a debug statement, which is value of name parameter is this plus name, right? And then system dot debug body equal to body, right? So for now we are not doing anything. All right, we are just printing parameter name value. We are retrieving the parameters, query parameter value from the request. We are also retrieving the body from the HTTP request and printing it in the console, right? So I will see these debug statements here, right? I will show you how we can see that, right? And if we successfully invoke this REST API from the Mule API, right, or Mule code, right, I will see some debug statements here, and I will show you how we can see that, right? So I think we are good from sales point of view. So this class is ready, right? And there is no problem, so there is no error as well. So as once you click on the save, right, and if there is no no error, then this code will automatically saved, compiled, and deployed on the Salesforce platform, right? Now this REST API is ready for use. Okay, Now we are going to our AnyPoint Studio, and we will use a Salesforce operation to invoke that um, REST web service. So here is the service that I'm going to use, right? If we want to invoke a REST web service, I have to use this operation. If I want to invoke a SOAP web service, I have to use this operation. So for now, I'm going to use this. Right, so this was previous session's operation. I will delete it, and let's configure this service first. Okay, so connector configuration. So we have already discussed how to configure the connector, right? Just to show you once. So this is how we have configured the connector, and in our previous videos we have discussed all of these authentication methods, right? So if you are new, you can look into the previous video. All right, and now come over here. So first thing is done, and then we are going, I mean, this is how default uh, behavior. How is the default behavior for this operation is that it use the payload, right, to create your HTTP request, right? And let's configure here the Apex class name and the Apex class method name, right? So this is where we will configure that which Apex class, right, which Apex class we want to use, right? So let me refresh it once so that it get the latest data. Right, so I'm waiting for this operation to end. So it's fetching the metadata from the Salesforce. Right, so here get employees, right, and inside the get employees Apex class there is a Apex class method, and the name of that method is get employee, right? And there is a specific pattern that you need to use when you call this method, or when you specify the value of this method, right? So I will recommend to refresh this list so that you get your Apex class here and the method here, so that you know this application itself populate the name properly, right? Otherwise you can populate or write the method name by yourself, but you have to follow this specific pattern, right, where this is your like the method name, right, and then the URL pattern, right, URI, right, and then the method which you want to call that method, like http post get or what, right? Because in our class we use the http post, that is why it's http post, and this is the return type of that particular method, in our case, which is get employees, right? So this is the return type. So make sure that you follow this pattern if you are writing it by yourself, right? And the one more thing, that if you click on this refresh button, right, and if you still do not get your class here, then maybe you should go here to your connector, right, and you should check this configuration here, Apex, right? So if it's false, like the fetch or all Apex REST methods, right, if it's false, right, then you need to make it true, right? And similarly, if you want to call a SOAP method, then you have to make this parameter true, so that your AnyPoint Studio fetch the metadata for the REST, for the API classes, right? REST classes or the SOAP classes that you have defined in the Salesforce, right? So you need to make this true. Otherwise, if these are not true, right, Mule will not fetch your Apex class here, and you will not get this, right? I mean, you can still write it by yourself, right, instead of selecting from the drop down, but then you have to follow the pattern. Okay, come to transform message here, right? So now what we are going to do is, okay, next, right? So now we are going to create the payload that we will use to call our REST method, right? Because whatever I'm going to write here, right, it will go in the, it is this transform message is setting it in the payload, and this guy use payload to create the HTTP request or call to the REST method, same thing, right? So now you have to remember that there is a specific pattern that you have to follow to call the REST method, right? Because I mean, there is a pattern so that you can specify the query parameters and the payload and any other HTTP related value that you want to send to REST method or the REST API, right? So first, let's set the query params. Query params colon this. Inside this, you set up all your query parameters, and then payload, and inside the payload we set up, or we specify the payload, or whatever we want to send in the HTTP post body, right? So whatever you want to send in the HTTP body, right, you specify in the payload, and whatever you want to send as a query parameter in your REST call, right, we specify that here. So as per our Salesforce REST Apex class that we have mentioned, right, we are expecting one query parameter, and the name of that query parameter is name, right? So name can be, I mean, it can be anything, right? So say suppose it's J, right? So I think there is a employee exists in our database with this name, so that is why I'm using this, right? Or it can be anything. Next, payload. So right now we are not using anything, we are not using the payload, or we are not utilizing the payload values, but I still want to specify some payload so that I demonstrate that you can also pass the payload to your REST API call using our invoke REST method operation, right? And that the body is accessed, or the body can rest, your HTTP REST body can be set using the payload, like this, right? So say suppose let's set some value. Say suppose that value is what we call the company is ABC Corp, and employee underscore ID is 23, right? So if we can pass two parameters, we can pass a big JSON object as well, or any number of records in the payload, right? So this is just for the demonstration, so I'm using something like this. Okay, so yep, I think we are good to go. We can test it now. So this is our this is how I will access or invoke this flow, right? So let me change the path for this flow now. So it will be apex call. Okay, so let's run this once. Okay, so my API is deployed. Let me invoke it. Okay, here's 081, and then we have apex. Oh, okay. So there is a problem. It says cannot convert this into an array, and this is because of, I think this is because of this. Okay, it should not be an array, it should be an object, right? Because we in all other operations we pass array, so that operation can use multiple values like to update, create, and multiple to update or create multiple records, right? But in this case we do not pass the array. So this operation need an object, right, in the payload, not an array object. So let's save and try one more time. Okay, it says the illegal character in the query at index 79. Okay, so this is because so I have actually faced this problem before as well. So so if we want to pass a string which has space like this, right, we have to encode that parameter before we assign it to the variable, right? So that's the problem with this string, right? So we need to use this URL encoding method which is available in DataWeave, right? But for now, let me change this string and keep it simple. Mike. Okay. Yep. So if you see it now, developer console, right? Let me go here, log. So you can see here a log is created, and if a log has been created here, it means uh, it means what we call Mule has successfully invoked this REST API. Okay, so click on this to check the logs and then click debug only. Right, so here you go. Okay, so you can see here the value of name parameter is Mike. So if you see, that is what I passed. That is what we passed in the query parameter, right? Where it is. All right, and next is your, if you look at the code as well, so right, so first value of name parameter is name, which is this, and then I'm printing the body, right? So this is my body, right? So body equal to the whole thing we received in the query parameter, right? Let me invoke one more time just to be sure that it is coming from my Mule API. Okay, let's see here, console again. See, there is one more lock created. Open this, click debug. Now here it is, right? So now, which means we are able to invoke the REST API, right, or REST API Apex method from my Mule flow. Right now, we have understood how we call the REST method, and we can use the same technique, to pass as many parameters as we want. We can pass anybody or any information in the payload as whatever we want or as per our requirement. Okay, and then further in the code, right, like here, if we want to use the information in the body, right, we have to parse it. We can use one of available JSON APIs to parse this, to access the different elements of the JSON body, right? Or we can use this parameter the way we want. Like for example, I can use this parameter to select the records from the database, right? So something like that. So if we want to like invoke, um, if we want to invoke a query, right, based on this name parameter, and then how we'll do, we have to write the query here in the square brackets like this. Select and then email underscore c, and this will be underscore as well, and then or c from what was the name of table? I think it was employee underscore c, right? Let me try this query once in the query editor, and then we'll paste it here. Yeah, so that query is working, right? And then we can further extend it, like where employee underscore name underscore c equal to name, right? So now this query is parameterized. Okay, and the value of this can be stored in a list, say suppose list, and then we can make it generic like this, employee underscore c equal to this. So all the errors are gone. So this is how you can uh, I mean, you can use the query parameters the way you want as per the requirement, right? So let me just print this, right? System dot debug uh, list lst. All right, and if you want to send this list, right, back to your uh, if you want to send this list back to the client as a response to our REST API, right? We can change the return type here, and before we do this, we have to convert this list into a JSON format, right, on XML format, the way we want to send. So and the return type can be string or something like that, right? And then we can send a response back to our REST API call. I mean to the Mule API, right? Something like this, right? But if you want to convert that the values which is in the list into a JSON or XML, then we have to use some other API like the JSON API, DOM API, right, to convert it into proper format. So which is not the agenda for this our session today, right? We can do this some other time. But if you are like come from the Java or something like that, right, some programming background, you will exactly know what need to be done here after this. So let's invoke this one more time and let's see what happens. Where is my okay, let's see if the my API is invoked or not. Like, to do that, what I'm going to do is I will check the logs. Yep, here is one another message, another log is created, and I can see it is unread yet. Click on it and then click on debug so that I see only debug methods. So here it is, right? So that query is executed successfully and I got a list. Right now I can use the information in that list to send to the response to the client by converting that list or the information in the list as a JSON in the JSON format or in XML format, right? So yeah, so this is how we invoke REST method from the Mule. Okay, now let's move to another topic, right, which is related to the source event, right? So if you see in Mule, in every flow we can have an event source, right? So event source is something which basically triggers your flow, right? In this case, I have used HTTP listener as an event source, right? So this listener is listening on port 8081 for the path /apex call. So if any request come on this on 80801 port on this with this port, then this flow will be invoked, and so it basically initiate this flow, right? So this is the event source. Similarly, can we have some event source for the Salesforce, right? I mean, can we have some event source that will have like the capability to initiate a flow in the Mule? So yes, there are some event sources available in this Salesforce package that can be used, and that will have capability or that will able to initiate a flow inside the Mule, right? Now there are two ways to do this, okay, and in fact there are two techniques through which this can happen, right? uh, so if you are familiar with the HTTP server or FTP polling, right, you can understand how that FTP or SFTP polling work, right? So we, in the client application, we configure something, listener or something, some component, right, that will constantly poll that FTP location or SFTP location for any file, and as soon as file comes, it pull the file, right? So here it's a client and this is server, right? Client makes the request. Client constantly poll for the data, right? And if it finds the data, it pull it, right? And we can define this polling frequency as well, right? So this methodology is actually called the pull uh, pull methodology, where we pull, the client pull for the data, right? Then there is something else that we call the push methodology, right, where your server, right, which is this, where your server initiates the connection to the client and delivers the data. Okay, like in your JMS, pub and sub method, right? So in the Salesforce we have both. Okay, in Salesforce we have both. We can have pull listener, and we can also use the push listeners. Okay, so in pull listeners, what will happen? So say suppose this is my mule, right, and this is Salesforce. So we configure the listener here in the mule, and then this will constantly poll the Salesforce, and we can configure it like every minute, every second, something like that, right? And then mule will constantly every minute, every second poll the Salesforce to see if there is any change in the data, right? Like we can say that if data is deleted, if any record is deleted in this particular table or the object, right? Table and object, same thing, from the Salesforce perspective, right? If there is any record added in this object, then do something here. If there is any record updated here in Salesforce, then do something here. If any record is deleted on this object, then do something here in the Salesforce, right? Which means, so we can have this, but in this case it is important to actually understand, right? In this case we can use the, we we have both mechanism, right? So first, which I will I will demonstrate is pull mechanism, right, where your mule will connect to Salesforce and see if there is any update in this record, right? But it will constantly poll the Salesforce, right? It will constantly poll, right? Now there is a problem with this approach and there is a disadvantage of this approach, right? That is why I explain this, right? So in pull mechanism, your Mulesoft will make multiple API calls. It will keep calling your Salesforce, right? Now in the Salesforce, let's look at this. Let's configure it and then we can discuss. Okay, so in Salesforce we can have some say sources like on delete object, on modify object, on new object. Okay, so let me show this one on new object. Okay, so this operation or this can activity can be used as a event source, right, as you can see here. Okay, so first we have to select the connector that is here, which is this one, right? I mean, it's not there for you, then you have to create one. Obviously click on add, right, and then you can create the connector. Now next we have object type, right? So I'm configuring a listener, right? So inside this listener, I have to tell which object we need to monitor through this service, right? We can have thousand and thousand objects, or the tables, right? We cannot monitor all of them, at least for this service. This service need to know exactly which object it need to monitor, right? So in our case, let's say suppose we want to monitor our employee object, employee, so this guy. And then you can see here, schedule strategy, fixed frequency, or if you want, you can set it to cron, and you can cron, and you can specify a cron expression, right? And here is the frequency, right? So every 1000 milliseconds, right, your Mule will make a call to the Salesforce to check if there is any new object added in the or if there is any new record added in the employee object, right? Every 1000 milliseconds, right? It will check if there which is like every second. It will check to see if there is any new record added in this employee object. If it finds one, if it finds that a new record has been added, then it will pull the details or data of that newly added record and trigger this flow, right? And so we can use that to do whatever we want to do with that information, right? Say suppose we need to sync that data to some external system. So this process can be used as soon as a new record is added in the Salesforce. This flow will be triggered, and then we can pass that information to third-party system, right? So let me do one more thing. Transform payload, right? So whatever information will come, whatever information will come from the Salesforce, right, when this event is triggered, right, I'm converting that information into the payload. I'm converting that information into a JSON object, right? And then I'm will log that information so that we see what information we are getting from the from your Salesforce. Okay. So this is my flow, right? So in this flow, we have configured on new object, and this is my transform service, right, which is doing the transformation. And and let's see how it works. Okay. Or actually, what I can do is to demonstrate this better. Let's see, that's fine. Let me go ahead and create a new employee object, right? Because this is the object which we are monitoring. Employee name is Amit, age 33, email is amit@amit.com, right? Okay, let's come over here. See, so this flow is executed, right? And Salesforce has written this information, right? So you can see is deleted false, right? And then the new record is added, and the it has also written, right, what information or what value we have added, right? So like the age is 33, this is what I enter, right? So the point is, when I now we can use this service to sync the data from the Salesforce to some other system. Every time a new record is added in the employee object, this flow will be invoked, right? Just to demonstrate this, let me add a breakpoint here, and let's debug this, right? We'll see it better. Okay, my API is deployed, and I have to do it actually fast and then stop this API because there is a problem. I will show you. New, right, say suppose j underscore 2 is 30, j underscore 2 at the rate of gmail.com. All right, yeah, there you go. Right, so my control has come and stopped here, right, because this is where I added the breakpoint, right, and you can see the payload that is written from the that this service has fetched, right, from the Salesforce, right, and it has information that I entered to create my new object. All right, so now we can use this method to apply whatever logic we want in the code, right. But with this approach there is a small problem, okay, and the problem is limitation in the limitation in your Salesforce, right. In the Salesforce, so what will happen now, right, your mule every second, right, Mule will make a HTTP request, right, or a API call. Mule will make a API call to the Salesforce every second to check if a new record is added in this particular object or not. If it's added, then it will fetch that information to the Salesforce and it will invoke my flow. This is all good, no problem, and this is how like we use FTP SFTP polling. But there is a problem in the Salesforce with this approach, and the problem is in the Salesforce there is a limitation that controls how many API calls can be made on a particular organization. So depending the license of your Salesforce organization, there will be fixed number of API calls that can be made per day, right. So if we use this approach, right, this may exhaust that limit very soon for your organization, and once that limit is exhausted, this will no longer be able to make the call or check for the new object, right. So it will your Mulesoft API will start throwing the error, something like that, that your limit has been exhausted, so further API calls cannot be made, right. And you can check that information inside the Salesforce. Salesforce, let me show you where you can see that. Setup, here, setup. Integration, no. Company setting, yep, here. And the company information, and say Control F. Let's search for API. Yes, here. API request last 24 hours, right. So I have made this many requests today in last 24 hours, right, and this is my maximum limit. So I can make only 15,000 API requests every day, right, and 10,000 requests for the streaming APIs, right. We'll discuss about the streaming APIs in a while, right. So this is the problem with this approach. Okay, so it exhausts this limit very fast. But so this is on new request. Similarly, we can use other listener operations as well, like on modify, right, or on delete. Okay, so let's quickly look into these two as well, right? So again, so connector, and then you have your object type. Object type is employee. What happened? Employee, and that's it. So if I make any update, all right, then this will be called, and this is on delete. Let me see if I can do copy paste here. Oh, nope, 1 second. Yep, there you go. This is fast, right? Yep. So Control S, right? Okay, let me add a bookmark here, and then a bookmark here. Okay, we'll see when these flows call, right? So that is I'm adding this bookmark so that my flow execution stop, and we see how and when these flows gets executed. Okay, so let's debug this again. Debug. Okay, come over here. Let's create no, so let's update something, right? So suppose this is the object, and here I update the name from Jayaprakash Yadav to Jayaprakash. Okay, and then click on save. Okay, let's see here. You can see here on modified. So this flow gets executed because we modify an object. Okay, and in the payload you will get information that what is updated, right? You can see here the employee name is now this. Okay, so this is how this guy work on modified, right? Now similarly, let's delete an object. This, click select that one, and then click on here and click the delete. Yep, delete. Let's look at here. See, now this time execution stopped on the on delete object, right? And click on this. This time you can see the same thing. The only difference is deleted is now true, and then you can see the information or the object information that is deleted. I mean the record information that is deleted. Okay, so I think I can stop it so that my limit does not get exhausted for today. Right, so this is how it works, right? And and normally I use the object, right, and the record interchangeably, and the reason behind that is I'm from a Java background, so each instance of something is for me is an object, but in Salesforce object is a different thing, right? Yeah, so that can be one thing. Okay, so I think that is how these things work. So in today's session we understood how we call the Apex REST method from the Mule, and then how we use different operations in the as an event source. Okay, so this is enough for today.